Hello, everybody. Welcome to A Manic Odyssey and our continuing conversation. And today I'm with my dear, lovely, wonderful friend, Sarah Finch, LMFT. And today we're going to talk about a lot of different things. She is a multifaceted, talented individual who owns her own private practice and has a myriad of information for us to dive into today, not to mention some incredible life experience. So, Sarah, hi. Thank you
Hi.
for doing this.
Yeah, I'm so happy.
Let's just start with the basics. Who are you? How did you get into mental health? How did you get into having your private practice? And yeah, just tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy we could do this and um, being friends with you for so many years. It's so fun that we
Yeah.
get to have a personal relationship and also kind of get into professional spaces. So that's fun.
Yes.
Um, so I got into the mental health field, I think because a lot of my own personal experiences of generational trauma
Yeah.
and really wanting to support others in their process with healing.
Yeah. That's amazing. We met doing pseudo mental health work, and that definitely impacted how I perceive just the process of the mental health system. We work with kids on the spectrum doing a specific intervention that neither of us really ascribes to anymore. I stopped believing in the tenets per se of ABA after doing some research and experiencing neurodivergent individuals who had horrible experiences with it. And then I went back and I thought about some of the interventions that I was asked to do with some of those kiddos, specifically the nonverbal ones, and it really wrecked my heart.
Yeah.
So I got out of that,
Yeah.
as
Yeah,
did you.
absolutely. Yeah.
But such luck that I got to meet you while we were doing that.
Yes, that's like the one glimmer.
Yes, yes. And we met while working at a specifically religious institution.
Yes.
And
The layers there.
I've talked at length about some of my religious experiences and traumas. Would you be willing to kind of share what that process has been like for you? You have such a lovely worldview now, and I think it would be beneficial if people understood what is your balanced worldview.
Yeah. Oof. Yes, so I am neurodivergent myself, and a lot of my clients are neurodivergent. And I've been working with neurodivergent folks. I was volunteering as a child, actually, and then in high school, I was volunteering as well. So I've been in the mix some way or another for a very long time. And probably a big part of that is because I was I really identify with not knowing I was neurodivergent. But, and then, getting into more of a professional kind of spheres of that. Yeah, we were working at a religious space, and that was really hard too. Not necessarily being contracted by that school, being contracted by our, how would you say it?
The company.
Yeah, the company.
Yeah.
And seeing the ways in which the school was probably really hurting kids too.
Yeah.
So it's these two spaces, therapists at the time and then school at the time, two spaces that were supposed to be really safe and healing for kids were very traumatizing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say my identification is more spiritual rather than religious.
Yeah.
Definitely deconstructed my faith throughout the years. I'm sure you have talked
We
a
both
lot.
went to religious colleges
Yes.
as well, so there's that fun layer coming into it.
Absolutely.
I mean, that was integral to my identity for so long. I mean, that's kind of the irony of the BPD diagnosis, is that Christianity was feeding me, keeping me alive because it was an identity, and the tools it was giving me were hurting me.
Yeah.
So was that kind of a similar experience for you guys? Because I remember we were talking about our converging religious schools experiences and the things they do the same and the things that were different.
Yes.
One of the biggest things being you identify as a woman and I'm a male, and the religious experience across that gendered line is very different.
Yes.
I've had experiences where I talk to people from the school I went to, and they're like, "Oh no, I had a terrible experience," and I'm like, "What? I had so much fun. It was such a positive experience." It's yeah, no shit. It was built for me.
Yeah.
As you're doing your practice, I'm safe to assume there are people that come in with religious trauma. What does that kind of intervention look like from a psychodynamic approach?
Yeah. So it's interesting because I think it's helpful that I have some of my own experiences and education, and like if my client is Christian or past identifying as Christian or deconstructing their faith,
Yeah.
I can really know what they're talking about or what they're battling with, some of like the scripture or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And also kind of I'm at the end. I've made it through to a space where I feel okay with myself, and sort of like you can too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so as far as working psychodynamically with clients with spiritual trauma, I mean, that's really, it's looking a lot at how the relationship with their parents really impacted how their relationship with God or their higher power,
Yeah.
how there's a mirroring experience there.
Yeah.
Usually how we perceive God is how we perceive our parents. So there's some of that in the work of working through spiritual trauma.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. It's depth work. And one thing that I noticed while interviewing a DBT therapist was it seems like one of the defining differences between behavioral therapy, DBT therapy is DBT therapy is a lot about the how, and psychodynamic is a lot about the why.
Yeah.
And in your experience, what would be helpful for people to know if they're doing like kind of a self-inventory of what therapy do they need? For example, I started with psychodynamic. I didn't need psychodynamic first. I'm an overthinker. I'm going to read about everything anyway. What I needed was the basic how-to skills. And now I'm actually going back to therapy with a more driven, specific approach because I wasn't just going, to go.
Right.
I have the behaviors, the emotion regulation, and the tools in check. Now I can go into therapy and do some really tough digging because I can regulate my emotions through it.
Yeah.
Doing the psychodynamic approach, kind of what is the fill-in that some behavioral approaches can't meet people at?
Yes. Oh, yeah. So I also want to clarify, I'm very integrative psychodynamic.
Okay.
So some therapists will say, I'm strictly this.
Yeah.
That's not me. I'm very integrative. So first and foremost is a trauma lens when working with my clients. And the way that works for me is if a client is not able to regulate and not able to kind of cope with the stressors of life, daily life, then I'm going to help them with some of those skills, incorporating, some of the DBT skills. I do like a lot of, because I work with a lot of neurodivergent folks, I do work with a lot of like the sensory type of experiences. So really giving them some tools to be okay.
Yeah.
And then, and then once they feel like they are able to tolerate some of those bigger feelings, then kind of going into those deeper spaces. As cheesy as it is, I always say it's like turning rocks over. It's like, what's really happening underneath? Sure, you have now the skills with DBT, which is so great, to kind of get through big feelings, regulate yourself, but to explore, well, why does that trigger me so much? Why did that get me from like 0 to 100 real quick? And so psychodynamic really helps us to understand, like, okay, what is it about this person? What is it about this relationship? What is it about the way they were interacting with you that led to those big feelings to stir up? And with psychodynamic and the way that I work in that integrative psychodynamic way is really looking at our relationships with their caregivers, our relationships with mom and dad, and understanding that, as annoying as it is for people to hear this, it's like they have a really big impact on us. And a lot of the things that we do are just so unconsciously driven. And so psychodynamic really helps us to pull, like, what's really happening, right? Like, I'm doing these things and I don't really know why. I'm just doing them, right?
Yeah.
It's like, well, let's understand why.
Totally.
Let's help you to really know yourself, understand yourself.
Yeah.
So, and that can feel so empowering
Yes.
to be like, oh, I'm triggered because of.
Absolutely. And I think we're describing a very integrative, almost like marriage of ideas where it isn't either or. It's a both and. Like truly, if you want a more holistic, you know, balanced self, you will need some of the behavioral skills with the psychodynamic and like the deeper work you're talking about.
Yeah.
I love the term integrative. I didn't know there was a difference between integrative and eclectic.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Um, Somebody pointed that out to me in a previous interview. When it comes to dealing with the trauma that we engage with our caregivers, what have you found to be beneficial to people who don't have a relationship with their parents where they can bring those conversations to them? For example, I have a relationship with my parents now to where I can bring up grievances from childhood without there being a wall of defensiveness. There's a lot more
Wow.
openness and curiosity, and people aren't, my parents aren't taking it as personally. Just like I'm not, I know, yeah, you know me, so you know the journey that it's been.
Yeah, but I mean, I really want to say it's rare.
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't know many of my clients that can say their parents could actually hear them.
Yeah.
So a lot of the work that I'm, sorry if I cut you off,
No,
but it
keep
just
going.
like was having a big reaction, just kind of thinking of like my week with clients this past week.
Yeah.
And thinking like a lot of our work is actually trying to individuate and differentiate more and
Yeah.
create boundaries and limits because their parents aren't really willing to make some changes and hear
Yeah.
their adult children.
Yeah.
So I feel so happy for you as a friend,
Yes.
and also as a therapist, like just so happy that your parents have come around to be more open to hearing you.
Yeah. Well, it was a like an intense lucky strike combination of things. One of them being, and we'll get to the question in a second. One of them being, me spending time in the hospital, right? That's scary for everybody. That's kind of a familial reset. Are we missing something? They asked a lot of questions. Some were insensitive, and now I look back at them and it's like, well, they didn't know. So like, of course, they're going to ask questions that I perceive are not sensitive because they don't know what I'm going through, right? Like only Nicole and like two or three other people knew the specifics. And that mixed with, I started with the why am I this way and got to the, oh, your caregivers are responsible. And that led me to like a lot of hate and anger towards both of them, or all three of them, my bio father, dad, and my stepdad and my mom. And that created, it's funny because like that created the necessary space to kind of pull the enmeshment away.
Right.
So that the only reason I'm here now is because that space was first created.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of tension between us when that was being enacted.
Yeah.
Because of course the question is like, why do you want space from me? And it's like, I think that our relationship is damaging.
Yeah.
And of course the defensiveness is like, how could it be damaging? Like, I love you. And it's like, well, love can be damaging if it's not done in a mindful, balanced way.
Yeah.
And then now coming full circle, my parents and I have like more, I think we have more compassion for each other. I have so much more compassion for them because they've been more open about their experiences. And so I'm able to kind of fill in more blanks, whereas logic would be like, well, they're bad because they're bad. Now I can say there's no bad and good. They did what they could with what they had because of what was given to them when they were given. Yeah, exactly.
Trauma.
Exactly. Like I think the best thought experiment somebody who's doing the work can do is just try to imagine being your parents with the exact tools they had and think what it would have taken for you to change course.
Yeah.
Because it would have literally taken, for my parents, right, it would have literally taken somebody within their community turning course, but then having a strong enough personality to convince them to turn course with them, because it just doesn't happen usually like that. And so to bring it all the way back to the question, what are some practical things that people who maybe can't afford therapy but need to like regulate these emotions and balance these relationships, what can we do on a kind of a daily basis to check in with ourselves and make sure we're taking care of ourselves and creating that distance where needed with those caregivers?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of resources available when it comes to like literature. I think online platforms like yours, providing just, experience and tips. And I think that's really helpful for people who don't have the financial ability to start therapy. But I also will say that I don't want us to just write off like, oh, I don't have the money for therapy.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of options when it comes to starting therapy that people just aren't really aware of.
Yeah.
And so my suggestion would be to kind of seek out support to learn more about those resources. Of course, learning through reading and YouTube and
Yeah.
TikTok,
Yeah.
some of those things can be really special, really helpful. And also looking into like, okay, how can I find a way to get therapy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a very good point. Let's like, because that is kind of the biggest complaint, right, within on the client perspective. And it's kind of because there is this pushing, and we'll get into this later, like there are just so many powerhouse therapy modalities that do finance their therapy in such a specific, we would say, predatory way in a lot of those situations. And a counterbalance to that would be, for example, our city that we live in has a program specifically for connecting people with affordable mental health providers. So I called the city program. They paired me with a representative who then paired me with a bunch of options.
Yeah.
And they were so attentive. They checked in with me to make sure that the therapist was a good fit. Did I want remote? Did I want in person?
Yeah.
Male, female, gender identity, whatever it could be. Like it was such a pleasant experience. And I wish that I could get in a time machine and go back 10 years and tell young Stefan, like, hey, like there's a lot of options.
Yeah.
Don't let the current of the mainstream pull you in to think that this is the only option. And one of those options is a modality that, or I'm sorry, a practice that can afford a sliding scale. Can you talk about your sliding scale model and just like the idea of a sliding scale?
Yeah. So I'm not gonna like talk everyone's ear off here, but you guys can check out my website, and it's very personal. I decided to share like a glimpse into my life story, and I come from generations of trauma, and a huge factor into that trauma was limited financial resources.
Yeah.
My grandparents live in Colombia now, but they did, come over to the States and didn't have as many resources. My mom then, so I think that plays a huge factor into healing and support. Absolutely. I want us to really acknowledge that. And also, sliding scale is exactly for that, which I think is so beautiful. And I truly believe that every practice should have some option for this. No, it's not an individual therapist's job to like fix the whole system. I know we can't do that, but a way to help support, change is by making decisions like this. So, for example, my practice, Nido Individual and Family Therapy, we have a sliding scale. So what that means is we have a specific fee, on the higher end. That is the main fee for those that can afford it. So it's like, if you can afford it, that's what you're paying. You have the financial resources to do that. For folks that cannot, we offer a sliding scale. We say, what can you afford? What can you afford for weekly therapy that is accounting for your resources? And so we offer similar, sometimes lawyers will do this, or like dentists, and so it's, we slide to a fee that the client can pay, and we respect that. And if at any time the client's financial situation changes, they're aware, we check in with that. And if it changes, then, they can move up to pay, if they get a raise or something like that, then they can pay that higher fee. But this is so important to me, and all of the therapists within my practice, when we interview with them and we tell them about Nido, I say, like, this is our value, and this is a must. Just so you know, if we do hire you, you need to have at least 3 clients on your caseload that are at this lower fee. And so it's a value that we uphold, and I think is so important, because otherwise mental health care is only accessible to those that have the financial
Yeah.
resources. And it's not fair.
No, it's not fair. And it's not only the financial resources, right? It's the mental resources. What can I expend? Nicole and I have talked about this a lot. Like, I'm a tenacious individual, so of course I went and fought and got the care I needed, and I had support, right? And I had a great partner. Like, it's like these are the things that I had. People who don't have those things and then don't have the financial support are experiencing hurdles left and right. When it comes to communicating with the clients who can afford that higher and on the sliding scale, what are some tools you give them to kind of avoid feeling resentment or feeling like maybe they're being taken advantage of? Because I've heard people who are on the more affluent side of things express those sentiments. Why should I have to, they should all over the place. Why should I have to do this? Why should I have to do that? How do you get them to kind of be a part of the solution?
So we have a couple options too. I want to mention, like, ways to donate or ways to support. We have the list of the library, for example, on our website if you want to donate. But everything is very clear to clients that do decide to be a part of our practice. That's something that I think is really important. Sometimes therapy websites can be like, I don't know, I'm looking on the website and I don't know anything.
Yeah. Oh, I just had that experience recently.
I'm like, oh, there's information here, but there's nothing that I can
Words
like,
are here,
tangibly
but
grab.
Yeah, exactly.
And I spent a lot of time into our website, and it has all this information.
I love your website.
It explains why therapy is so expensive. It explains what sliding scale is.
Yeah.
It explains, for the client that is paying the highest fee, where that's going.
Yeah.
It's not just the therapist gets to take home that fee.
Yeah.
It's going to a lot of the things that not a lot of clients really know we have to pay for.
Yeah.
And so I think the education is huge,
Totally.
right? Providing people with, this is what it's about, this is why, and then giving them the choice. They can say, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be a part of that. Like, okay.
Not a good fit, yeah.
Yeah, not a good fit.
I love that. I will say, and for those of you that, have the time, I would go check out their website. It's fantastic. Well, what I love about your website is that it's very transparent. There is no hidden agendas on your website. There's no things you have to look for to decide. One thing that really rubs me the wrong way is it can be challenging to determine whether or not a practice is affirming or non-affirming. And you have to really know what words to look for in some of those cases to be like, I think this is an affirming, or I think this therapist at this practice might be affirming, but I can't decide. Based on what I'm reading on the website. Not the case for your website, you're very clear. And I wanted to ask you what it's been like opening up your doors and being so transparent about, hey, this is an affirming safe space. Yeah. We're letting you know right up front, no secrets here, like this is a safe space for you.
Yeah. For front page, right on the home page, as soon as you click, we are LGBTQ plus affirming, we are neurodivergent affirming, culturally compassionate, anti-oppressive. So yes, that is clearly stated. So there isn't, and especially for a lot of neurodivergent folks, there's limited spoons.
Yeah.
Because of the heightened sensitivity that neurodivergent folks face, we have limited spoons, limited capacity, limited energy.
Yeah.
So while maybe 30 minutes looking through a website for a neurotypical person might be no problem,
Sure. Yeah.
that can take a lot of energy out for a neurodivergent person.
Yeah.
But for them to just hear, like, okay, someone knows what's going on and I know what to expect.
Yeah.
That just is really, really important that's clear. I didn't want any guessing. I didn't want people to have to do the trying to comb through and figure out, am I going to be celebrated and embraced here, which is a huge part of wanting to clearly make that known.
Yeah.
But I wanted to actually create a practice that was specifically for that the marginalized person.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was like, kind of like, if I could have gone to a therapy group or a therapy practice, what would I want it to be? I would want it to be affirming. I would want it to be straightforward.
Yeah.
I would want to know these things. So 80% of my clients come from marginalized backgrounds.
Wow.
So whether they're queer, whether they're neurodivergent or disabled in some way, a person of color.
Yeah.
So, and I like to keep that, for me personally, that is, I go through my kind of roster every once in a while. I'm double checking, okay, I'm at that, that percentage, and that's really, really, really important to me.
Yeah.
Especially because we want a therapist that looks like us or represents us in some way. And so for me to say, like, yeah, I'm a person of color, I'm Colombian, I'm a woman, I'm neuroqueer, and you can sit in front of me and there are certain things that I completely understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
You don't have to waste your session trying to explain what the Q in the LGBTQ means or something like that, that just like, we get it. We know what that is. So
yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Let's fast forward 3, 5, maybe even 10 years into the future. Nido's doing well, your clientele is building out, you've hired a bigger staff. What ways do you think that Nido could be a part of the solution when it comes to not being predatory to graduate students? Because as I've talked to my different DBT therapists, they've been so generous with their information, there continues to be this trend of, I kind of had to eat shit for a while. And then, and then one day, I'm given the golden key of you've got your hours. Now you can charge appropriately. Could Nido be a resource that would change that model? And if so, for people who are watching and who maybe already have that resource in place, how can they shift that so that it's not being predatory?
Yeah. Oh, if there are therapists watching that have a private practice, they're going to feel some things with what I'm about to say.
We're all about our feelings here,
right,
so
we're
going for it.
So there are a lot of private practices where the boss is on the top, top of the pyramid, making the most money, usually seeing the least amount of clients.
Yeah.
And they're making money off of the younger therapists or, not as experienced therapists who are gaining their hours, things like that.
Yeah.
They're making their income off of those therapists.
Yeah.
So, can I educate a little about this?
Please, yeah.
So what happens is as a person goes to grad school to be a therapist, they have to accumulate certain hours. It's unpaid while they're in grad school, usually, somewhere between 200 and 600 hours, completely unpaid.
Which is absurd. You could at least give a stipend to take off tuition, your tuition is dropped based on the hours you can complete. Is one idea that comes to mind. Sorry, keep going.
Well, and it's even gas, driving, your lunch, oh my gosh. So it's completely unpaid. It's, so there's that. Then once you graduate, you can apply to have your registered associate license, which is not the LMFT. It's a pre-licensed situation. And then you get a supervisor, right? And usually most supervisors will take a certain percentage, anywhere between 80 to 50% of your session fee.
Whoa.
So a therapist that is an associate might see a client for $100 and only get $20 of that.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
So it's so interesting. They have a master's degree, but they're
making less than in and out.
Yeah, it's wild. So the reason why I bring this up is because a lot of practices function with the boss, and while yes, they're supervising their associates, and that they should take a percentage for supervising or for the rent of the office, for those specific things. Totally.
Yeah.
but not just for them. It should go to the needs of the practice, not just for them to take home to put in their pocket.
Yeah.
And so a lot of practices will do this, where the boss is, taking, pocketing a lot
It's
of
very
this.
corporate.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So I bring this up because you're asking, how is Nido different, or how could Nido impact other practices to make some changes? Well, one is I'm very clear when I hire, I tell my therapist, this is where the percentage is going, by the way.
Yeah.
All of these things. I have an Excel sheet, and just so you know,
Yeah.
right? I'm not
Yeah.
pocketing any of this. Actually, I lost a lot of money in hiring therapists because I was paying them out of my pocket to, help them kind of start up.
Yeah.
But I wanted to. So I think it's really shifting the mindset of these practice owners. Instead of seeing it as like, I'm CEO and I should make the most money, it's really seeing it as like, are you actually utilizing what you're bringing in to care for the practice, care for your clinicians, care for your clients, by communicating clearly to your clinicians of where the other percentage is going.
Yeah.
Do you have time off?
Yeah.
We do offer insurance. We offer sick time, PTO. Every conversation or meeting I have with my clinicians, that's paid.
Yeah.
It's not their free time,
Right.
that I just get to take of theirs.
Yeah.
So I think incorporating more of that is what's going to help overall,
Yeah.
help show practice owners that there's another option, there's another way to do this, besides kind of being at the top of the pyramid.
Totally.
And using, kind of taking the income from their clinicians and pocketing that, and really seeing it as remembering why you got into this field, to care for people, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, how do we really kind of use this as more of a pot to care for where needs caring for, and also you're making your income based off of the work that you're doing.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it is interesting. I was just talking to my mom the other day about, the issue in the United States is, why do we have private healthcare? Like this understanding of the individual can negotiate for whatever the price may be. I mean, price is so subjective, and the value of things are so subjective. It does feel very capitalistic, and this is nothing on a capitalist, right? Like, there's a time and place for capitalism. If you're an industrious person, if you are founding a corporation, if you work in corporate America, like, capitalism is such a good thing for you. In the mental health space, though, where there is so many vulnerable individuals, and I would include even like our most like affluent clients, right? Like somebody who is in the 1% of the 1%, is still a vulnerable individual if they don't have the skills or the mental acuity to understand their deeper emotions. And somebody could come in, as what we're talking about, like those predatory practices, and charge them through the roof because, of course, that's just good capitalism. What is it that we can be, as a client, as somebody who's looking for a therapist, what are the questions we can be asking so we're not feeding into this system? Like, if I'm looking for a therapist and I find out they can afford me, like, oh, I can only do $50 a session. And they're like, oh, we can do $50 a session. Is it appropriate for a client to say, hey, are you taking the whole $50, or are you only getting $5?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Clients can ask whatever the fuck they want.
You hear that, folks? Ask whatever the fuck you want.
Yeah, clients can ask anything. It's the therapist's job, to decide what and how they want to answer. But yeah, if a client is seeking out a therapist and they have questions and they're curious, totally ask your potential therapist, like, I want to make sure, do you get this whole fee, or does this go to rent or go to some of these other things in your practice? How does that work? Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is, as someone who's been on the couch quite a bit, like it's intimidating to walk into the room, to feel the presence of the information and the knowledge this person holds and the ways that
Yeah.
they can quote unquote see you. It feels very, you kind of are on the defense as soon as you walk in, especially if you're hypersensitive, right? Like
Yeah.
if you're a super feeler, as someone said to me recently, like, or a super sensor, like you're oversensitive to judgments. And all of a sudden you're walking into a space where you're the broken individual and
Mm.
this person's supposed to be the healer. It can be very scary.
Yeah.
What does Nido do to like mitigate that fear as clients are coming in?
Yeah.
Outside of what you've already said, which is have people look like you, have people who understand what you're going through, and then just like putting on the front page news of Nido, like this is what we stand for.
Yeah.
What other ways can you guys, or are you doing that?
In the consultation, when a client first reaches out to us, we do, what are you looking for in a
Yeah,
therapist, blah, blah, blah,
yeah,
all those, typical things. But really saying, do you have any other questions that we didn't address?
uh-huh.
And I always say, and usually they say no, fine. But I always say, if there are any other questions that come up for you,
Yeah,
just shoot me a text
yeah,
and ask me.
yeah,
Yeah, I'm open to answering any of your questions. And I think what that does is I'm very aware of the power dynamic that can happen in a therapy setting.
yeah,
My hope, though, is in starting to ask them, do you have questions? Or if there are any questions, let me know. Feel free to ask.
yeah.
The hope is that I'm just in the first consultation starting the collaborative process versus like therapist,
Yeah.
client,
Yeah.
right? Like it's
Yeah.
us, we're together
Yeah.
and really giving the permission, not that they need permission, but to show them like you are allowed to ask questions.
Yeah.
Please do.
Yeah.
I want to hear your questions.
Yeah.
I'm wanting to answer whatever I can. And in my work, we also do at Nido reviews. So every like 6 months, I send out to all of my clients. And it's optional, they don't have to. But I send them a form where they get to review me.
Oh.
Yeah. So I ask a few different questions, just about how they're feeling about the work, how their comfort level, if they're feeling like it's collaborative, what's been helpful, what hasn't been helpful. And then I also just give a space like anything else.
Yeah.
Anything you want me to know.
Yeah.
Anything at all. And so I send this to them and the other therapists. We do this every 6 months. We send it to our clients. And this gives them the space to take their time and, answering in the privacy of their home or whatever it is, really think about these questions and provide the feedback to us that, maybe would be challenging to bring up maybe more face to face. So that's another way that I think helps with the power dynamic, helps with creating a more collaborative experience. Yeah, that's something that we do too.
I love that. I love that. What is it that you as a team do? Because I know in DBT there's Team Console, which is built into the comprehensive DBT program. And every therapist I've talked to that participates in DBT, I said that's the lifeblood of it. Without that, they can't do the phone coaching or the group skills or the one-on-one. What is kind of the equivalent for you and your team? Is it getting together, or is it monthly, weekly, or like you know what I mean? Like how are you guys keeping each other from burning out?
Yes, I love when people ask therapists, how do you prevent burnout? Thank you. Yes. So I do at Nido, we do a mandatory paid, right?
Yep.
Paid consultation group every other week.
Okay.
And so we all meet and we talk about our clients, what we're struggling with. We consult with each other. We're working together to care for our clients.
Yeah.
And then something else that I do is I have like a group, Google group kind of, it's like a Teams type of situation. I forget the name of it, but, and that's available at all times. The clinicians know they can message me, they can message the group, ask any questions where I'm accessible to them in between my sessions, and they get the support that they need. And they also know they have their clinical director on the team. So if they need to call the clinical director and say like, hey, this is a kind of a crisis situation, or this is what's going on, I need some support.
Yeah.
So it's really like knowing that they're being supported, we're there for them.
Yeah.
Is a huge one. And then again, I always ask like, do you have any questions?
Yeah.
Do you need anything? What can I do?
Yeah.
And I'm actually creating a feedback form for our therapist right now. Jen, our operations manager, and I started on that this week so that the therapist can, give me feedback in a similar way that I was just mentioning, that the clients can give the therapist feedback. So I think those are really helpful to keep that conversation going. Giving people more of an opportunity to share and to talk, to tell me what's going on for them.
Yeah, I love that. I didn't know that there were other resources for neurodivergent individuals outside of ABA for quite some time. We had talked about reading about the criticism of it from people who have grown up and now have a voice and can share their truth. Could you talk a little bit about what other options are there? If parents are watching, or if someone who has a child, a brother, a friend, a family member, whatever, who is across the spectrum, what other resources are there outside of ABA?
Yeah. So I think OT, so occupational therapy and speech therapy, those are two that immediately come to mind that are focusing on, that can really help with more of those like skills, right? Like, I'm struggling to sensory wise, different things like that. Yeah. But also regular therapy, like talk therapy, is a great resource, but neurodivergent affirming therapy, right? And when a neurodivergent person is reaching out for therapy, I would encourage them to ask their therapist or potential therapist, are you neurodivergent affirming, and what does that mean to you? Yeah. Right? What is neurodivergent affirming therapy look like for you in your office? Yeah. Because it's not just, am I accepted or tolerated as an autistic person, for example. It's, am I going to be accommodated for my needs? Yeah. Am I going to be celebrated for my strengths? Because there are a lot of superpowers we have as neurodivergent folks. Yeah. And am I going to be supported in creating systems that can help support me in some of those areas that I find to be challenging? Yeah. Or is this a setting where you're a tolerant therapist, and you're going to try to change me, or sort of try to take the autism out of me? Right? Yeah. So I would say talk therapy is actually a really great resource. And I would even say when a clinician is neurodivergent affirming, they also should be aware that the way that a client is going to communicate isn't always just through their mouth words. Yeah, yeah. So I run 3 neurodivergent groups, and we have whiteboards and like clipboards with like markers and things like that for the in-person groups. So if someone is just like limited resources that day, their spoons are gone, they have like barely any energy, and maybe they are just like, they can't formulate words that day, they have, we offer some options for them to be able to keep that communication going, and then also acknowledging the sensory needs, right? So offering fidgets or sensory accommodations, like dimmable lighting, or non-scented things, or weighted pillows or blankets. There are so many things a therapist can do to help support the sensory needs. And those are all ways that a client can get support as a neurodivergent person that doesn't involve ABA. Right. Right. We're not trying to, I think ABA is really trying to make neurodivergent people look and behave less neurodivergent.
Yeah.
And neurodivergent affirming therapy is actually helping the client to accept their neurodivergence
Yeah.
and create systems around them
Yeah.
to support their neurodivergence.
Yeah.
To be able to take up their space and be as autistic as they are, you know?
Yeah.
So to answer your question, there's so many options outside of ABA.
Yeah.
And I would strongly suggest looking into neurodivergent affirming therapy instead of that.
That makes sense. And it makes sense to me because when I look back, as I often do, on the kiddos that I had the most success with, it was the relationship I had with that kid, less than the interventions I was using. It was conversations about after having a meltdown. And to your point earlier, right? Like, no shit, I got along with them so well. They all have such intense anger. Like, I understood when they were like from a 0 to a 10.
Right.
And Nicole and I have joked about the fact that like with some individuals I have zero patience, and I don't know where that comes from, or potentially I'll explore what that means. And then with certain populations, like neurodivergent populations, or across the ability spectrum, especially in adults, just from like life experience, exposure, and for whatever reason, my personality, like I could have a kid scream in my face for an hour and a half and never take it personally. Yeah. Never be like, how could you scream at me? Do better. Don't scream. Like I remember one kid screaming for like a solid 45 minutes. Like it was an impressive amount of time. And when he was done, he was exhausted.
Yeah.
And we got to have a conversation about why we were tired and like what's going on in our body. And so it's interesting, thinking what we have now and then looking back and applying it to what was. There were some really special moments, and I think it speaks to what you're talking about, the interventions of psychodynamic and integrative talk therapy. I always loved the speech therapists. They were so helpful. They had great relationships with the kids. Like they were so good at integrating games to make learning an experience that wasn't just about what you were doing. It was a generalization of skills. And the occupational therapists as well were also always, when I was in the hospital, those were my favorite people, were the occupational therapists. Okay, so we live in a very interesting time. You had mentioned earlier, right? Like I have an online platform where I'm doing my best to kind of disseminate DBT skills and the information that I find to be really helpful. And through my life experience with all of the interesting hurdles that were either put there by myself through self-destructive behavior or just life happening, that I'm able to kind of condense it in a bite-sized manner for people to consume online. However, I have noticed, and I've been asking DBT therapists the same question, that there's this insane influx of the social media therapists and kind of a social media therapy. And I try to do my best to make it clear that like, I'm not a professional. You shouldn't be taking what I'm saying as direct prescriptive advice. If it speaks to you, amazing. And if it's helpful, amazing. Take it and leave the rest. When it comes to kind of the almost soundbite therapies that people are getting, can you help people who are listening? How do we discern the helpful from the almost overload of information? And here's an example that I like to use is the narcissist, right? A very common psychological term thrown around that has a very complex meaning. And yet, if you were to go on social media and type in hashtag narcissist, you would probably get like, 6 million videos of different therapists saying 6 reasons to know how your boyfriend or your father or your best friend is a narcissist. Yeah. How is that helpful with both access, and how is it harmful? And then is there a gray area where people can learn to discern for themselves?
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad we're talking about this. So honestly, a lot of therapists are utilizing social media as marketing, free marketing, free advertising. Mm-hmm. So I think it's helpful in the way that someone then can see the therapist, click on it, and maybe book a session. Mm-hmm. So I think it's helpful in that way. I think that it's very unhelpful because there's no context. It's like a 30-second video about, 6 reasons your dad's a narcissist, and then everyone is thinking, oh, my dad is a narcissist. Yeah. Well, the therapist said. And so I think a lot of therapists are really utilizing it as marketing and trying to like get attention, and so I think it's great in that way. But I do see it in my practice. I see it as really unhelpful, because then my clients will come and sit down and say, oh my gosh, why didn't you tell me my dad was a narcissist? I'm like, what?
What? Yeah.
Let me show you this video. And
You're an orphan. Like, wait, what?
Yeah. Yeah. So, so it definitely, it complicates things, and the power dynamic that can unfortunately happen in a therapy room is then happening online, where this person that has all these letters after their name is saying these things, and then the client or person just assumes that they're right.
Yeah.
So it's like both, right? It's helpful and not. What I do love is when I see a video that specifically a person, like some of, like you're a mental health advocate, you have been a client, you're talking about more of your experience, right? I love when I see, I'm not a therapist, but I've been a client, and these are things that my therapist has taught me that have been really helpful.
Videos. Yeah.
Right? Like that's something that I see is really helpful.
Yeah.
Little tips and tricks, I think, can be really helpful, but I think it also then can make people think that that's what therapy is about.
Yeah.
And therapy is not just about like, okay, here are the tips and,
it's a yes and. There are some tips and tricks.
There are some therapists that do kind of like more pop therapists or positive psychology type therapists that are really focused on just like, here are some tools for you and kind of go on your way.
Yeah.
But not all therapists are like that.
Yeah.
And so, seeing that on social media can sometimes give people the wrong idea of what therapy is.
Yeah.
And people will say, well, I follow all these therapists on TikTok, so it's like I'm going to therapy.
Right. Yeah. No, because you're saying, it's a collaboration. So if you're not feeling, and there is kind of like this synthetics collaboration from social media, and I run into that a lot, where I have to be aware that they're seeing a version of me without or within the context of the video. They're not seeing me 100%. So we have a pseudo relationship of, I'm a person who brings either information, joy, thought, whatever it may be, to their day, and then they're kind of imbuing whatever meaning after that. When it comes to therapists, though, like we're talking about, there is an immediate, I think we as a culture deify experts very quickly. So it's like, as soon as you say, hey, I see all those videos like, hey, I'm a language expert. I'm going to talk about the inherent biblical text from ancient Near East, whatever it may be. And you're like, oh, that's super interesting. And like, this person's interesting. And then as soon as it becomes ways that impact like who I am, I find that, especially people who have like identity disorders, right? Like, you grab onto that because it speaks to you. And I felt this the other day. There was a podcast clip, and it was a therapist as a guest, and he was talking about complex PTSD. And he was describing the behaviors of people who have complex PTSD and what they go through and how they experience life. And I felt the pull of like over-identification. Like, oh, this must be me because I do these things. So if I didn't have the tools that I have now in the experience, and then I step back and I go, well, let's check the facts of this feeling and this emotion. No, we have tendencies, and yes, we've done these things, and you're not this, whatever it may be. Right. If you could like give people who are consuming social media mental health advice, what would be, your tips and tricks for discerning this is information that is helpful, this is information that is unhelpful, and this is information I'm maybe not so sure about?
Yeah. I love disclaimers. So I think a therapist or someone online that gives the information, right? As a neurodivergent person, for example, like sarcasm, I don't really get very well. Yeah. So sometimes I'll see a video and I'm like, I don't get it, right? Yeah. And then, but if I click the caption, it says, using sarcasm, for a funny thing, like they'll say, they'll be able to kind of lay it out there. Yeah. And that feels so helpful for me. So in your question, I think for more content creators to have disclaimers or to have like by the way,
Yeah.
this is what this is what it is. I'm not a therapist, or
Yeah.
I love seeing, social media is not therapy. TikTok is not therapy. This video is intended to be funny.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is a joke.
Yeah. Yes.
Those things I think are really helpful and can help people come back to the facts. Like, you're checking the facts a little bit, but also like really remembering like, oh, this is just a 10-second video. This isn't really my whole world.
Right.
Right. Or I love when I see therapists saying like, if you resonate with this, talk to your therapist.
Yeah.
Right. Things like that can be really helpful. So I would say look for kind of those disclaimers, look for that information, hold it loosely, take it with a grain of salt. If something does really identify with you, bring it into your therapy, or kind of get some support with, what it is, what's it about. And don't use it as like face value.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. Do you think there is benefit to coming into therapy with a goal in mind, or maybe an idea to work on? Or is the therapy room kind of a space where, it doesn't matter, like, you're there, we're happy that you got here, now let's kind of explore it together? And then as I'm asking that question, is it really a both and?
Yeah.
Okay.
I see both, and both are great.
Yeah.
It's funny, sometimes clients will come in with a goal, but then in our work together, we recognize, well, actually, I think this thing, can we reprioritize our conversation to discuss more of this?
Yeah.
And maybe come back to, this thing you brought up originally.
Yeah.
So yeah, coming in with a goal is great. When I do a consultation with a client, I do always ask, like, what's leading you? What's leading you to want to start therapy? What's going on? And usually people have some idea. And then there have been a couple that are just like, I just really wanted to try therapy.
Yeah.
And I'm wanting to check it out and learn more about myself. And I'm like, awesome. Cool. Yes.
Yeah.
Let's do it. So yes, both and.
Love
definitely.
that. Love that. Yeah, I've experienced that as well. I think it's very much like a audit yourself situation. Like, if you're a person who, like, I'll just use myself as the example, right? Like, I had goals. However, they were outside of the context of what I actually needed. So then therapists would give, suggestions and advice in line with the goal, not realizing that what I needed was over here, not this thing. When it comes to disclaimers, I do have a religious question, which is do you think it's helpful for people who are deconstructing or questioning their religion to go to a then religious therapist, or and hear me out. No, it's a long question. It's a long question. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt that this is a potentially very open-minded religious person who just happens to share the exact same views as the people who could be experiencing it. And, I'll use myself as an example, right? So, like, while going through deconstruction, I was seeing a therapist, and that therapist did have an open mind to a certain extent, and they were still influenced by some of the ideas that I was struggling with, and their influence came through in how they interacted with me, especially when I was younger, because as we've talked about, like, if within certain religious circles, youth and intelligence, or youth and curiosity, or youth and vitality are super cherished. And so I've always been very hyperverbal. And so as a kid, I could explain things in a way where an adult might go, oh, I didn't know a kid could explain that. And some of the language they would use would be like, oh, you moved my spirit, like a spiritual movement, or I felt God speak to me in this way. And like bringing that into therapy. What are the pros and cons of, because you want to seek out therapy that is reflective of your values.
Yes.
And when somebody is in that questioning phase, is it more helpful to kind of reach outside of the scope of your questions, or is it more protective and beneficial to stay within that kind of protective worldview?
Yeah. It's tricky because, we're taught in grad school to be the blank slate and to, be objective and non-judgmental. But it's tricky if a therapist has really been involved in Christian spheres and that type of world,
Yeah.
right? And they're active in that. The messages that they're getting in their life are in that world are so heavy and so impactful that it is going to, whether they will admit it or not, it is going to come through in their therapy. And so it's tricky because I think that a non-religious therapist would be more open to exploring faith and religious, whatever the client's bringing in, religious ideas or spirituality in a more open and curious way than a Christian therapist would. Just because they already have that.
And salvation's not on the line.
Yes. They're not trying to, save the client or sort of steer them in a certain direction. They're not feeling like it's my role to like help this person get to, the salvation or whatever it is, be saved. So while I see the value of your question, because there's something that can be really helpful in a Christian therapist knowing what you're talking about. But I think there's a little too much of that can really impact the work versus maybe, taking more of that time to maybe explain more of that to a non-religious therapist because of there's more of that openness. So while
genuine curiosity.
While there would be, more time taken up explaining more of those specifics. I think because of the openness factor, and salvation's not on the line. I think more work can be done there.
Yes. I have a very personal connection to the impact of a person seeking help. And then, of course, if you're in a religious institution, you're told to seek it within the institution. And then that person in my life sought help, tried to get help, and was basically turned back towards a very unsafe place because of the decree of the Bible. And I want to be clear here. I'm not specifically talking about, like, this is general. We're not just talking about Christianity. Like, this is true of Mormonism, Islam, Buddhism, whatever it may be. If you're coming in and the person you're speaking to already has a kind of dogmatic framework, even if they're like what we would call like curious, open-minded, they're still going to fall back on the bedrock that could potentially be, their worldview and their faith. And in my experience, it wasn't religion that was influencing specifically the choices that the therapist was choosing. It was the 12 steps.
Oh.
Which is a very religious, has very religious undertones and institutional history. I was talking to a recent DBT therapist, and she was participating in the 12 steps, and her husband for I think it was 20 to 30 years. And now they're at a place where they don't believe they need sobriety. And she was very open about the fact that she's fine, she's okay. And what frustrates me is and what we're talking about, if a therapist comes into it thinking 12 steps are the best solution for addictive behavior, then when you start explaining your compulsive addictive behaviors, they're going to go, you need to go join a 12 steps. Instead of thinking, what are the other ways that this behavior could be understood or mitigated? Because I don't know, I have a very open, nuanced idea when it comes to the idea of addiction anyway. Very similar to kind of what you're talking about with the, we're gonna work the autism out of you. Right? This addiction is who you are. You are this addiction. If you don't circle your life around this addiction, you'll be unhappy. Doesn't jive with the principles of DBT and the principles of dialectical thinking. And doesn't jive, it sounds like, with the integral approach that you're using. It is very challenging to get out of those communities once you're in, for a couple of reasons, mostly positive. One, you feel understood. There are people who are experiencing the similar or same behaviors. Got a lot of great book recommendations while I was in the 12 steps, and made a lot of really important, meaningful connections and friendships. And so I miss those, and yet I can't go back because I choose not to participate in that form of intervention. What is it that the approach that Nido takes, that this practice takes, when it comes to addictive behaviors? And if a client comes in and says, hey, I think I'm an alcoholic, or hey, I think I'm a sex addict, or hey, I think I'm an overeater, whatever it may be, how does your approach differ from kind of the dogmas of the 12 steps and maybe the more intense interventions?
Yeah. So I'm going to come back to the cheesy analogy of the turning over of rocks,
Yeah.
right? Like, okay, maybe that's what your rock is called,
Yeah.
alcoholism. Okay, what's happening underneath there? Like,
Yeah.
where is this coming from?
Yeah.
Or when did this start and why? What brought this on?
Yeah.
Before alcohol, what were you using?
Right.
Right? Like really just a lot of curiosity and like turning over, kind of seeing what's going on. And then really collaborative again, wanting to keep in mind that it's not our job to fix our clients, It's let's hold the mirror up and maybe point to some things that our client can't quite see
Yeah.
as clearly.
Yeah.
So really having that collaborative approach and recognizing that the client, it's their life.
Yeah.
They get to decide, what works, and we can be alongside them and see like, okay, how did this work? No, that didn't work out so well. Okay,
Yeah.
let's try something else. Like, let's see how this goes.
Yeah.
So really utilizing the relationship to kind of hold hands throughout life,
Yeah. Yeah.
keeping it very collaborative. And I would say to recognize there's not one thing that is going to blanketly help every single person. We are so different. Everyone is so different. And so it's impossible to think it's just going to be XYZ for all.
Yeah.
But you do bring up a really great point about the community of AA, for example.
Yeah.
Gosh. And I mean, if we really think about a lot of these folks in AA have lost their families.
Yeah.
They don't really have a lot of community outside of these areas.
Yeah.
So what I would suggest is to build community, group therapy.
Yeah.
Or, if someone identifies as LGBTQ, going to the center, the LGBTQ center.
Yeah.
Hobbies.
Yeah.
Your wife loves cooking.
Yeah.
She goes to cooking classes, can meet new people, right? So it's finding other spaces that they can kind of build community and get that family type support that they were getting in AA, if they're trying to kind of move out of that area.
Yeah.
And I'm a firm believer that, I'm not like a case manager or like, social worker, but I do have a lot of referrals, it's like, or when a client is needing a support, I do take it, take time to look into, what could be some options.
Yeah.
I've had situations where clients have felt really isolated and needing more community, and talking with them. Okay, what about this? What about this? I found these resources, could we try this out and see how it goes?
Yeah.
So it takes a lot of bravery, but exploring
Totally.
some other avenues.
I love that. And that leads perfectly into my next question, which is, if you could peel back the curtain for the clients and for people who aren't therapists, what does it look like and what does it almost feel like when you are in with a client and maybe you've seen them for a handful of times and you realize, oh, I'm actually not a good fit for this person. It's taken some time, but now that I understand, I don't think I'm the best fit, because the client is in such a vulnerable spot and they may have been thinking that we were leading to the same place. And we would probably agree that it's unethical to stay in that place if you feel you're not the best fit.
Absolutely.
So what is going on behind the scenes? What does that thought process look like? And how do you communicate with the client to say in a compassionate way that, in your best interest, I'm not a good fit?
Yes. Yeah. So I'm thinking of an experience that I had where the client was really looking for more a directive experience.
Yeah.
They were really wanting me to tell them what to do, and that's not how I work. That's not. That doesn't feel right for me.
Yeah.
And as much as I'm very open to making, some accommodations here and there, I'm not going to go against my values. And that felt like against like my value of not, because my approach is more explorative and what do you want to do, and more putting it back onto the client versus me telling them what to do.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking of a case I had, a client I had a while ago, and they were really wanting me to give them advice, really wanting me to tell them specifically what to do.
Yeah.
And I did really try to explore that and really kind of knead the dough and try to make some adjustments and see what we could do. But in the end, they felt very strongly about wanting specific direction.
Yeah.
And so what we realized is they weren't actually looking for a psychodynamic integrative therapist.
Yeah.
They were looking for a life coach,
Yeah.
A career coach.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we had the conversation of, this is the way that I work, and kind of refreshing them of like our consultation call. I'm sorry that there was a misunderstanding about that.
Yeah.
And communicating that there's nothing wrong with you. I'm not saying I don't enjoy you. I'm not saying I don't want to work with you.
Yeah.
But the specific things that you again and again are seeking is not something that can come out of this dynamic that we have.
Yeah.
So it seems you're looking for a coach.
Yeah.
And here may be some options
Yeah.
for more of that specific like career coaching.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't leave like a bad taste in anyone's mouth because of there's like so much of that communication and explaining why. And I do it in the session.
Yeah.
It's never like texting the client, I thought about this or whatever. I'm like, oh God.
Text message breakups. What a time.
Yeah. So really taking the time to talk about it and asking, do they have questions? How are you feeling about this?
Yeah.
But yeah, there have been like that specific case in mind. It's nothing wrong, nothing against me, nothing against them, just it wasn't the right dynamic that they were looking for.
So it's not like a big secret that therapists deal with a lot of heavy conversations, heavy subject matter, and that they do the aim is to be a blank slate, yet we're human beings. It's just not possible. We're not robots. We're constantly taking in the stimulus and deciding what to do with it. Mm-hmm. You're married, you have an amazing partner. Mm-hmm. What is it how do you leave work at work?
I don't.
Amazing. Well, because there is like this like mythical idea that the therapist like shuts the door, clocks out, and then just is like, all right, back to like the real me, right? So what has been your experience with that?
I've seen that meme, and like I've had some friends that work kind of like in corporate or like office settings, and it's like on Friday when I shut the computer, and it's like that's not really my experience. It's like on Friday when I leave my office thinking about my clients.
Yes.
No, yeah. I'm so human, and while I absolutely keep the session about my client, I respond, I emote, like I have reactions. Sometimes I even use, that reaction of like, what is it like to see me, feel angry about this?
Yeah.
Or I do really use my humanness in the room. But as far as leaving, my work, I guess the way that I boundary my weekends or post-work is I don't really respond to clients, and they're aware of this. Like, I'm not going to respond to things outside of our business hours. And they know that I'll respond the next day, things like that. But I think about them, I'm so human. I'm very a sensitive person. I care about my clients. So yes, I do think about them, and I think that's not something that I really can stop. That's just me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some other therapists are able to kind of shut that off more directly or more specifically, but for me, I'm a slower processor, so sometimes something that a client will say in session, maybe in the moment, something didn't click in the moment.
Yeah.
But then later, over the weekend, I thought about it and, oh, okay, I want to actually bring this other thing up.
Yeah.
So I allow for that to happen.
Yeah.
But I will say I do need to care for myself. I can't be thinking about my clients all the time.
Right.
And so sometimes a client will come to mind and I'll kind of be like, okay, hello client, in my head, and like, okay, I kind of send them a kind wish over the weekend or whatever it is, and then kind of go about my day. So that's kind of ways that I sort of boundary and care for myself.
Yeah.
I do have consultation with my partner. They're also, like you said, a therapist. And so we do sometimes consult with each other, kind of, am I missing something? Is there a blind spot here? Which is so great too, because they're also psychodynamic. So we can really like work with each other and help each other with our clients. But so it's gray.
Yeah.
It's not like a fine line of like, okay, after 7, I do not think about clients and I don't come back to it until the next day.
Yeah.
It's kind of gray. I have to just kind of be mindful and taking care of myself and this space in my head, of like, okay, I'm going to, think about something else or redirect my attention.
Yeah.
But I am very reflective, so if I find that there's a client that I find myself thinking a lot about outside of session, I'm curious about that. What is it about?
Yeah. Why is it sticking with me?
Yeah, why is that client really coming up for me? And sometimes it's because the client is kind of seeping out of their session, and I might say like, hey, can we try out 2 times a week for a couple of weeks and see how that goes?
Yeah.
And then I notice, once we do that, I'm not thinking about them as much because it feels more contained within the session. We're getting more of that time to process together and to support them. So I'm not, so sometimes like what I'm thinking about or what I'm feeling really is an indicator of like psychically what's happening in the space. So I really try to reflect and use that.
You're so mindful. It's one of the things I admire about you. And I know, personally, you've gone through a lot of self-healing, a lot of intentional work, still working, still healing. Yeah. And you were one of the few people who approached my diagnosis as like a not the end of the world scenario. I was very fortunate to have a handful of people who treated me that way, and you were one of them. One thing that sticks out to me that you said that Nicole and I talk about all the time is this idea of healing from mental illness, not because there's anything wrong with you. And going back to the neurodivergency, no, we're not saying stop being neurodivergent. What I experience is, and what I continue to experience is that this mental illness manifests in ways that continue to surprise me. And as those come up, I give them the time and the energy that they deserve. I'm mindful of them. And then, now that I'm starting therapy again, now I can bring it to the therapist and say, hey, I'm noticing these things. Yeah. For people who maybe are, the dread is so prevalent, the dread is so specific and heavy, and let's say, all they could do was see this clip or click on this video. Can you kind of put into words when you say, hey, you can heal from this? What does that mean?
Oh, okay. Oh. Yeah, I think the scar is still there, right? The puncture or the experiences in our work, in our healing, in our therapy, our journey throughout time, right? It doesn't cover that up. It doesn't erase the things that have happened.
Yeah.
They're still there.
Yeah.
Their scars, even if they fade, we can still remember them, or there's scar tissue underneath, the surface.
Yeah.
It still happened.
Yeah.
So it's not like, oh, I'm done, I'm better,
Here's your certificate, you graduated.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe we could do like certificates. You finished your first year of therapy. Here you go. I might start implementing.
How'd you get a new car? I'm on year 10.
Yeah. So Um, yeah, so it's not that it goes away, but what I see is we get stronger in carrying our experiences. We build the strength and the muscles to carry our experiences and knowing what we're carrying,
Yeah.
how to carry it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what the healing is more about.
Okay.
I hear this cheesy time heals, and it's like, well, no.
Yeah, and you don't mean it in it, yeah, because that could be a very invalidating statement. Like time heals all wounds. It's like, how do you know the timeline of my wound?
Right.
Like
Yeah.
time could be endless, and I might
Yeah.
never get to what you're saying is possible.
Right. Yeah, I think the healing is more about learning how to carry our experiences, learning what those experiences are, how
Yeah.
they've impacted us,
Yeah.
and really building the strength in carrying it, like almost like a backpack.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like, ooh, this is heavy, but what's in the backpack? What are we carrying? How are we carrying it? We're building strength
Yeah.
to carry it. And what the healing is to me is that we get stronger, and so the backpack doesn't feel as heavy.
Yeah.
We get stronger in knowing what's in the backpack, in how to carry the backpack
Yeah.
in a way that works for us, right?
Yeah.
With DBT skills,
Yeah.
or with other ways. And with time and using that and remembering what we're carrying and knowing how to do it, it feels lighter. It's not lighter.
Yeah.
The trauma or the experiences don't go away.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
It's not that the pack is lighter. It's that we get stronger in holding it.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't feel as,
Yeah.
as heavy for us.
I love that analogy because if you go in the opposite direction of healing for this scenario, the pack almost becomes a part of you, like your skin grows over it. And now it becomes like a tumor that you're not only carrying, but it's killing you. And I think that's true for a lot of people and I love the analogy of just building up emotional, mental, spiritual strength, because you're right, like the experiences don't go away. The trauma is still there, and now you just know what it is, where it comes from, and what to do next.
Yeah.
And so I love the idea of building up the strength to carry the things that we've been carrying already.
Yeah.
And part of that is validating the strength you already have. Like, look at how far you've gone carrying it without any tools or support. Like, give yourself a big hug and like whatever it may be. When it comes to doing the work and dealing with that trauma and healing from the things we're talking about, if a person is feeling like I'm going nowhere, right? If they're unable to kind of use the skills and put context to the feelings, and the pack feels so heavy, what is a kind of a reframe that they could do to check in on where they need help? Because they might not need help in the same way that they needed help before,
Right.
but now they're still feeling that dread, that heaviness, and now they can at least identify if there is a backpack. Is the next step for them, hey, we're going to get therapy, we're going to get intervention? Or is the next step just acknowledging that, like, I do need that next step?
Both.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. There's a humbleness. I think in our journey with healing, we got to be humble.
Yeah.
We have to stay humble that we're not meant to know how to do all of this on our own. That's why we have all of these people with different brains and different, even therapists with different modalities, right? It's like we are meant to collaborate and work together, and a therapist is someone to bring a different perspective.
Yeah.
But so, I think in being humble and kind of being like, help, I'm missing some things.
Yeah.
I need some support. So like having a humbleness to that, and having a therapist who is also humble to like, I'm going to help you as best as I can. I'm not perfect, and we'll figure this out together. But acknowledging that you need some support, and it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay that you would need support. Of course you do. And to be brave to take that next step.
Yeah. That's amazing. So a statistic that lives, rent free in my head is I think every day, somewhere between 125 and 135 people take their own life by, through means of suicide. And I think that the number last time I checked was somewhere between like 68 and 72% are white males. And we're talking about this idea of pride and humility. How how can we get that population into the doors that they need to, that could be beneficial for them, uh, without kind of asking them to lay down everything that makes them who they are at the door. And, for example, right, let's say somebody is our stereotypical, traditional masculine guy, and he's in a traditional marriage, and his partner is expecting him to be this strong, stoic individual. How can we get that person into the therapy door without asking them to give up who they are completely?
I would say that it's in this partnership, what really stood out to me is both of these people, we kind of need some support here.
Yeah.
The partner, the female partner, and the male potential client that you're referring
Yeah.
to, I think. And collectively, really deconstructing what does strength really mean. You had mentioned like stoic and strong, right?
Yeah.
It's like, well, what really is that?
Yeah.
Can a male be the breadwinner and also be really sensitive and tearful?
Yeah.
Yeah, those things can exist at the same time, for example.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think it's sometimes I do find it appropriate to, one or two times bring in the other partner to have a group conversation about some of these things, because the husband might be like, well, my wife expects me to be XYZ.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, let's bring her in. Let's talk about this.
Yes.
Yeah. And maybe realizing, oh, it's not actually that she expects me to be stoic. She just wants me to, be the breadwinner, or wants me to, fix things in the house or whatever it is, and it's like, how can I uphold some of these things while also tapping into these other parts that maybe I haven't been bringing forward, or I've been scared to bring forward in fear of being viewed as weak, or being viewed as not also able to do those other things that are deemed as strong.
Yeah. 100%. I agree. I've the dialectics are so important when it comes to identities and how we're talking about the help that people need. The hurdle I see as the most obvious obstacle is the lack of male representation within the therapeutic field, which is so odd given its sexist history.
Yeah. Yeah.
You went through grad school. You experienced the culture of going through grad school. In your opinion, like, what the heck's going on? Like, where are all the guys at? Has this field been so demonized by a certain political group as like a feminine ideal, like teaching and nursing and all these other, strategically making them feminized so that they could, for example, historically pay them less or marginalize them in a different way? Is it as kind of as simple as that? That's where the pendulum has swung, or is it really just that, there's just like not an interest or a lack of recruitment or whatever it may be?
Yeah. Oof. It's like you're bringing up something that's like multifaceted.
Yeah.
It's like, where do I even go with this? Okay. Well, yeah, it's wild because Freud, Jung, like all of these really impactful, like, people who started this field, who created this field, are all white male.
Yeah.
So I just think that's interesting, one. And in grad school, majority of my professors were women. We did have a handful of men teaching. In my program, 80% women who were seeking, education to be a therapist. 75, 80%. I think us as a society, we have really compartmentalized, these are the things that males are, and these are the things that women are, and it's like, it's hurting us. It's absolutely hurting us. I do think there's something that is really helpful about females being therapists is there's already, like we were mentioning before, that power dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
And so because of the patriarchy, because of a lot of men being the perpetrator in a lot of situations, I think that it's really helpful for there to not be another situation where a male is holding that power in the therapy room.
Yeah.
I know we want to kind of deconstruct even just that idea, but I think that is helpful. But as far as males coming to therapy, I think a huge part of why men don't come to therapy is they're scared.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're scared.
Yeah.
To be seen as weak or to actually probably get in touch with some of those more emotional or vulnerable parts.
Yeah.
And I do wonder how we can make that more of an inclusive space.
Yeah.
I think the DSM does a terrible job of this in a lot of the diagnoses being for women, like even borderline.
Oh yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Right? It's
used to be histrionic because women are hysterical.
Yeah.
That's what Amber Heard was called in the court in front of everybody. Said that she was histrionic borderline. I couldn't believe it. I was like, I thought that was a term that was not used anymore in the psychological community. So no, it's and the thing I failed to mention too, to add to what you're saying, is that there is an education deficit. It's getting worse. It's getting wider. Boys are falling more and more behind, and there are reasons for that as well. There's a few really good books. One you got for my birthday that I'm almost done with that talks about it extensively. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is that you said that men are scared, and I want to speak to that fear specifically because understandably, a lot of men will come across my content and think that like I'm a part of this mass of men hating cancel culture warriors, essentially. And I think there were so many positive things that happened when the power shift of the Me Too movement took center stage, which was kind of immediately deflated by Donald Trump getting president, but we don't need to get into the politics of that. What I'm more interested in is what was such a challenge for me is once you address your internal patriarchy, once you address your misogyny, there is so much shame over the behaviors that have come about because of those beliefs. Or even behaviors that you had even when you were deconstructing, like for me, like even when I was deconstructing those beliefs, right? Like some of my most egregious experiences were while I was under the guise of feminism because I hadn't experienced any of the healing that needed to happen. It took a willing and open and compassionate partner, therapist, team, and friends just for me to survive my shame, to get to move it from shame to guilt and then from guilt to understanding. What can we do? What could you do? What could therapists do to mitigate that very real fear men have that, hey, if I come to the table, I'm not only going to be asked to leave, I'm probably going to be like pitchforked and torches on the way out because how dare you share those things you did? How can we let men know that you did a bad thing or you did a hurtful thing? You're not the hurtful thing you did. And just because to somebody else you might be a demon doesn't make you that. You have angelic parts to you as well. How do we talk to these guys? How do we get them to know that that fear is valid and that when they do come to the table, we're ready and like willing to have them?
I want to, and I think you know this, but I want to just clarify when I said men are scared, that was not coming from a place of judgment at all. Like oh, they're scared. No. I'm like, no, they're scared. Like, of course they're scared. You know, I'm really saying that with like a lot of compassion. So I wanted to clarify that. But I think what helps, and I know this is very common knowledge, but I really emphasize this when working with men because this feels like it helps create some safety. Is that this is their space, this is confidential. No one has to know you're here.
Right.
If that's what you need, right? Sure. If that's what you need to help support this process in the beginning, because usually that is like a lot of situations. A lot of the guys that I work with, they're like, I haven't told anyone I'm going to therapy. Yeah. And then it, you know, closer to that year mark, they're starting to share like I've been going to therapy. I shared with my family, or I shared with my friend that I'm going to therapy. Yeah. But that initial kind of early on, like, this is your space and no one has to know about this, really, I think helps protect that a bit more for them. And I try to view my clients as their little selves a lot. Yeah. This really helps give compassion. So I have worked with perpetrators. I have worked with clients that have hurt kids, even, you know, men that have hurt kids. Yeah. And, you know, I've been in some therapy spaces where I have heard other therapists go like, oh, I don't know how you could work with them. Right. And it's like, they're underneath, you know, their experiences are little children, traumatized kids. Yeah. If we can hold that space and hold the understanding of where this is coming from, we can actually bring healing for these folks, for everyone, obviously. But like, I think especially with men, not in the therapy room, not seeing them as the perpetrator and really seeing them for what happened before, seeing them as that little boy that was hurt first, really can help a therapist gain more compassion and actually help the client. Yeah. And clients can feel that, you know? A client can feel if you really care about them, or if you're scared of them, or if you're judging them, regardless of the words that come out of your mouth. Right. They can feel it. Right. Even if it's, you know, even if they can't consciously, you know, form the words of like, I feel judged. Yeah. Unconsciously, that's a dynamic they can feel. Yeah. And so I think it's really, really important for therapists to, like, before the client comes in, to kind of take care of themselves and to kind of reset, like, okay, I'm going to be seeing this client. I want to remember their background. I want to kind of see them from a little boy perspective. Yeah. To gain that compassion so that I can actually work with this client. Yeah. And that helps really leave behind the judgments and the skewed perceptions. Yeah. To really meet clients where they're at. Yeah. No, 100%. I mean, that makes perfect sense to me. Going back real quick to the idea of like the inner child within each person, it is, I think, a common misconception that just because we're grown, we are adults. You know what I mean? Yes. And so it's like we have all these grown-ups walking around with little children inside of them that are acting in childish ways. Yeah. And so then we have other adults that are judging that other person based on the childish actions, but treating them as though they were, you know, fully realized adults. Yeah. And we see this up into the upper echelons of power down to like the most disenfranchised. Yeah. What can we do to kind of check in with that little person, that inner child, on a kind of a day-to-day maintenance level? Yeah. Well, what we know is most folks that have experienced a lot of trauma are really functioning from kind of going about day-to-day life more younger. Yeah. Kind of in those younger places. Yeah. And yes, we all have our inner child, totally, but I think it's important to highlight that specifically folks that have experienced a lot of trauma are functioning there. But what can we do to check in? It kind of brings me back to getting in touch, connecting with more of the unconscious. Mm-hmm. We don't realize that we are acting with our young self. Yeah. And usually when we are dysregulated, when we're kind of in those moments where we're like, whoa, what just happened?
Yeah.
You know, I did that, but I don't know why. Things that we then end up feeling remorse for.
Yeah.
That's our young self, right? That's our young self came forward and took over.
Yeah.
And we are so connected to our young self. We are all the ages that we once were.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But ways to connect, I think some of the psychodynamic or more attachment, depth-oriented types of therapies are really helpful in connecting with the inner child, the younger self. On a day-to-day basis, I would say pausing, more taking time, more pauses, being more reflective. I think we live in a very quick world, and we are always quick to respond.
Yeah.
So I would encourage pausing before speaking, checking in with ourselves, more of that mindfulness, intentionality can be really helpful to connect with, like, I was about to say this.
Yeah.
That's my younger self.
Yeah.
Okay, adult self, can you come forward? Okay, I'm going to say this instead.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, totally.
Right.
No, I love that. I mean, it happens the better you get at it, or like the more effective you are, the quicker that conversation takes place behind the scenes of your thought process. We've talked about so many incredibly important things, and I want to end on like a kind of an uplifting note.
Yeah.
So, you're neurodivergent. You're an incredibly powerful person. What are your superpowers as an individual? However you'd like to bring the identities we've talked about forward. If you want to give it to each one, if you wanted to say, here are my just like general superpowers, like what makes you effective and awesome?
Yeah, my superpowers are bittersweet, I would say. Not trying, I know you said you wanted to end on this positive note, but I'm gonna be real. There's, it's like one side of the coin and the other. Being Colombian, being a person of color, I've faced discrimination, and come from, lower poverty, and at the same, coin, other side, there's so much culture and so much beauty and so much I can pull from, that makes me really special. And then being neurodivergent, it's hard because I am such a sensitive person and I get very, very overstimulated and very tired easily. I don't have as many spoons as like a lot of neurotypical folks have. So I get kind of deflated easily or tired easily. So that's kind of like the one side of the coin, but on the other side of the coin, I'm so sensitive that I can like sense everything.
Yeah.
I can like feel people's feelings in my body.
You're very good at checking in, I will say. I sometimes you check in on me in ways that I didn't know I needed checking in on. And I'm like, how did you know that? You're like, I just felt it.
I can just feel things really, really deeply. And so I would say that's like the superpower side, right? So I like to hold the both and acknowledge both. They're both there, and using, what I can, and also accommodating for, what the harder parts.
Yeah, I love that. As we're wrapping up here, if you came across this and they're neurodivergent and they've had a very invalidating experience up to this point, can you give them like a word of encouragement, or just like something that they can kind of hold on to and put in their pocket to know that they are valid and that there is like a life worth living out there despite the things that have been happening thus far?
We can feel so alone in our experiences, and it can be hard to find people that share our experiences, but there are. There are. And once we meet those people or come into contact with those people, it's like, oh my gosh.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So I think an encouragement would be to consider that you might not be the only one. And how might we find, who those other people are that share those experiences, whether they're like pen pals and you find them and they're across the world, or social media friends, or
Yeah.
people you meet in a group, like in the neurodivergent group,
Yeah.
that there are people that are like you and get it.
Yeah.
We can feel like no one gets me.
Yeah.
No one knows what this is like.
Yeah.
Especially when kind of we are surrounded with maybe a lot of neurotypical people. I can feel that a lot. So recognizing, okay, there are more of me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there are people like me.
Sarah, thank you so much for doing this and for taking the time and for chatting with everybody here. You can find everything you need to know about this wonderful practice, Nido, on the website that we will have linked below this interview. And you can check out what Sarah's up to and reach out to her. This is a great, safe place, and I hope that that's been made incredibly clear through this interview. And we'll have more. This doesn't need to be a one-off. But as of right now, it is done. So thank you so much, Sarah.
Thanks, Stefan.
Bye, everybody. See you on the next one.